What's going on, people? Mike C-Town here. I don't know, this video is probably going to be a little weird. This isn't an important video or topic or anything like that. I just didn't feel like talking about anything super serious today, so instead I just wanted to talk about something that I've been thinking about lately. So some months ago I posted this on Twitter. Sometimes I think about how not many of my views have changed since I was a goofy, paranoid punk kid in the 90s, and I wonder if this means that I simply haven't grown up much, or if it means that we were always fucking right about how things were gonna go and no one listened to us. So yeah, I think about this occasionally, especially when I'm listening to bands from the 90s that I really loved. But this particular thing came up because I'd had a conversation with a friend about the current state of the world, and they were asking me why I wasn't surprised or super freaked out by the things happening in the world right now when it comes to, political discourse or police brutality or white supremacy, etc. And my thing is, I've always thought we were heading towards this place of having someone in the White House that was performing things and suggesting things with direct connections to fascism. Not only that, I've always been paranoid about the government openly and or blatantly fostering racism and white supremacy. Also, I've been talking about the misplaced trust of police since I was very young. People who have known me for many years will tell you that I've never liked or trusted cops. And if you're a cop, or if your dad's a cop, or if your friend's a cop and you're offended, please understand that I could not give any less of a fuck than the non-fuck that I actually give. So save your pig positive energy unless you're talking about animal rights. Oh, and before we get into this, I can already sense through the force that there's some nerd in an Immortal Technique shirt that's just getting ready to start telling me all about how punk bands weren't the only ones talking about these things, and hip-hop has spoken out against these things as well. And yes, sir, I realize that. However, in this video today, I'm specifically talking about the punk scene. So, yeah. So of course, there's many different scenes within punk and hardcore. Not every scene's focused on the same things, but the faction of punk and hardcore that I listened to and paid attention to kind of fostered these ideas of this bleak future unless we, a group of goofy kids in ill-fitting clothes and colored hair, did something about it. We sang and we screamed about racism and sexism and homophobia and capitalism and consumerism and police and anti-environmentalism and religion and war, and about how all of these things were going to destroy everything and kill us all. And we were basically met with either calm down or just a general, feeling of being ignored. And this sentiment came from the right and the left. So much so that I grew tired of constantly yelling about this shit, I just couldn't understand why no one was seeing things the way I was. And then it seemed like people, including bands, just got tired of talking about this shit as well. And that's actually one of the reasons that I lost some interest in the hardcore scene. As that musical genre got more and more popular, the really political bands seemed to be pushed to the side a bit. And then I just got a bit sick of even talking about this stuff, and I fell back on it a bit. And again, this stuff was still in the back of my mind, I just wasn't as outspoken about it anymore. So fast forward, and these things have all been coming to pass. And while I'm super pissed off, I'm not surprised at all. And I want to make sure that that's understood. My lack of surprise does not equate to apathy or acceptance. I'm just saying that I've been mentally preparing myself for this to happen since I was old enough to actually understand what these systems mean and how they work. And the older I get, the more I see how all of this happened, and I'm like, yep, of course, this is the path that America chose. I remember people saying that I was just being paranoid when I would tell them about these things, especially when it came down to ideas like police murdering members of minority groups and the idea of a pseudo-fascist operating within the White House. A lot of times they would just dismiss these ideas as some silly shit that would only happen in movies. Not like we didn't already have examples of state-sanctioned murder by police or presidents who were pushing ideas with clear racial agendas. But I would always think about how these things would get worse and more apparent. So one of the things that immediately brought me into the punk and hardcore scene was their stance on racism. Hearing bands like Gorilla Biscuit say, you can kiss my ass before I read your zine, there's no good side to this white power scene. Or hearing something as simple as Dead Kennedy saying Nazi punks fuck off. That was so important for a young black kid to hear, and then to discover that so many of these bands held the same stance. And going to these shows and hearing these bands talking in between songs about unity and brotherhood and stomping out racism before it got out of hand and we couldn't stop it. This was a common narrative in the scene when I was involved. Whether or not people actually stuck to this or if it was just lip service, that's a different story for a different video. But Nazi Punk's Fuck Off also gives this whole idea of racists and Nazis hiding within organizations right under our nose. And this is something that has stuck with me since I first heard the song when I was like 14. But the lyrics say, "You still think swastikas look cool, the real Nazis run your schools. They're coaches, businessmen, and cops." This was something that really made me start paying attention to how everyday people in regular institutions were enforcing elements of white supremacy, which takes me to my next point, which is the fact that growing up, I would hear tons and tons of songs about police brutality and a rejection of authority. The song Authority by Void, which talks about revolution in the streets and no more authority. Dead Kennedys talked about this in numerous songs, Bleed For Me, Police Truck. Or look at a song like Fascist Pig off Suicidal Tendencies' first album, which is one of the first punk albums that I ever bought. Riot Squad, bash their heads, kick their ass until they're dead. I want to be a fascist pig. Love to fight, what a thrill. We don't stop until we kill. I want to be a fascist pig. This is from 1983, and this was not only one of the earliest times I'd heard a band talking about police in this way, it was also one of the first times I'd heard them connected to the term fascist. Something that made a lot more sense once I thought about the way I'd been harassed by police. Before these bands, I'd assumed I was just running into bad cops, not realizing it was a systemic issue. The song Dead Cops by MDC also brought this home. What You Gonna Do, The Mafia in Blue, Hunting for Queers, Niggers, and You. They were outlining how police were focusing negative attention on certain communities. Then discovering the band Chokehold and hearing the song Conditioned, it clenched it. To protect and serve, to dictate and abuse, you made me hate you. You created me with your superior attitude, and you expect me to respect you. The lyrics that follow this part really outlined how I felt about cops at the time, but I won't put them in this video because I'm sure it would get taken down, so make sure you go look them up on your own. The punk and hardcore bands I liked also spoke a lot about women's issues. You had bands like Bikini Kill and Spit Boy and Bratmobile and Huggy Bear. You had songs like Beta Motel by Crass. You had Fuck Machine by Propagandhi. There were even blatantly anti-rape songs like One of Three by Reversal of Man, Trapped by Function, Castrate by Chapter. We had bands like Pansy Division and Los Crudos opening people's minds about gay rights. You had tons of bands like Earth Crisis, Subhumans, Nausea, Conflict, Abnegation that talked about environmentalism. More bands that I could ever name that were talking extensively about politics. Sick of It All, Agnostic Front, Bad Religion, Destroy, Reagan Youth, again, Crass, Subhumans. I feel like I could go all day here, so the point is I spent years believing these institutions and belief systems were going to destroy the world as I knew it, and so much of the music that I listened to was reinforcing these ideas. So I spent much of my youth and my 20s trying to spread the word of these things to very little avail, and now as an adult, it's been a bit of a mindfuck to see so many of the things that we were screaming about actually coming to fruition. The funny thing is, we really thought we were going to change the world. Like, literally. When I was a teenager in the punk scene, I legit thought that we were going to be the reason that our generation was going to be the last one to have to deal with systems of inequality like racism and sexism and homophobia. There was a common sentiment among a lot of us that was, me and my friends are going to change the world. I can't remember what band popularized that, but sometimes I do wonder what happened. Partly I think it has to do with the fact that we all thought the world was so small and therefore the problems would be easy to fix. Then we got older and realized how massive the world is and how complex these problems are, and maybe some of us just got intimidated. But that doesn't change the fact that we were still fundamentally right about these problems, and that makes me wonder how and why we failed so hard. I've said before that I think about the fight between Yoda and Palpatine in episode 3. We were Yoda, slightly arrogant, thinking we could defeat Palpatine, inequality and injustice, on our own, and we failed. You know, not realizing that this is simply the way America moved because this is what America was always going to be. Not saying it can't be better, but this path should not be surprising. But then I look at what's going on with younger kids and how active they are and think that maybe some of that fed over from fringe groups like ours, you know? Maybe some of the stuff that we were doing back then in some way inspired some of the revolutionary attitudes that we see today, the same way things people were doing in the 70s and 80s inspired us in the 90s. When I spoke about this on Twitter, my friend Danny said, "They were the shut up and do as you're told generation. There's no way they were ever gonna listen. We're still paying the price now." And she's totally right. People back then were fairly okay with the status quo, and when it came to the future, they were far more interested in hoverboards and spaceships than they were ever going to be concerned with the various ways that humans were going to destroy our world from the inside out. But I kind of hope that this mentality changes, and now that I'm an adult, I hope others like me start paying attention to our world and our youth and start listening to them and trying to actively work with them to ensure that our future isn't quite as bleak as we assumed it was going to be back in the day. I don't know. Again, this wasn't an important video. I guess I was just wondering if there are other punk kids who were involved in similar scenes who feel the same way that I do. I don't know, just something I was thinking about and felt like getting out in a video, even if it's incoherent and nonsensical. But that's kind of what you guys come to me for anyway, I assume. But yeah, that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. By the way, I recorded this before we got the official winner of the current 2020 presidential election. So yeah. Anyways, I will be getting back to my regularly scheduled program, of course. So make sure you're subscribed and the bell's clicked and all that good stuff. But as usual, thank you for living. Thank you for loving. Thank you for being you. And I'll see you guys next time. All right. Peace out, boy.